On today's World Insight, China's two sessions convene in 10 days. What does this gathering mean for China and the world?
This is a very important occasion for China to discuss all kinds of policy issues.
And the world economy in the shadow of the coronavirus pandemic. We hear from the IMF Deputy Managing Director to find out more.
Supply chains within the domestic economy can be smoothly geared to support domestic demand.
And finally, we speak to British scholar Martin Jacques. He discusses the role of governance in halting the pandemic.
It's not just that individuals don't react in the same way, it's that the state is disinclined to intervene in this way.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. After being postponed for 2 months almost, China's largest political gathering, the two sessions, are set to kick off next week. The event draws worldwide attention as it may send messages about China's economy, among other key areas like public health. With the coronavirus now under control somewhat in China, businesses, both domestic and foreign, are gradually getting back on track. What to expect now from this year's two sessions? What kind of solution is likely to provide for some of the most daunting tasks facing the country? Before our discussion, take a look at this.
China postponed the two sessions for 2.5 months to gain a wider window to fight the unexpected COVID-19 pandemic. Now conditions for holding the meetings have been met. China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, announced that it will hold the annual session starting on May 22nd. The National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, on the other hand, said its annual session is set to commence on May 21st. The dates were set once the domestic transmission of COVID-19 within China had subsided. For this year, national lawmakers will consider China's long-expected draft civil code, the government work report, and other staple documents at the annual legislative session. However, due to the epidemic, health is expected to top the agenda, with a slew of public health-related legislation in the works. Meanwhile, once the worst hit by the COVID-19, China is now one of the first to restart its economy in a gradual and orderly manner, offering hope to a world still affected by the pandemic. The upcoming two sessions are expected to roll out a series of policies and measures which will spur development at home, help stabilize and reactivate the global supply chains, and boost confidence in the global economy. And as the epidemic is still uncontrolled in many countries, issues like international cooperation to combat the disease and China-US ties are all in the spotlight for this year's two sessions.
And for more on the upcoming two sessions in China, we have via Zoom in Beijing, Zhang, professor at the School of International Studies with Peking University. Meanwhile, in New York, Fred Tang, president of the China America Public Affairs Institute. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start by asking Professor Zhang, as you are a standing committee member of the CPPCC, tell me more about what do you think about significance for this year's session at a very critical time and certainly delayed for almost 2 months.
This is a very important occasion for China to discuss all kinds of policy issues. We cannot miss this. And also, it is significant because China has been quite successful in the first phase of the fight against the virus, and the holding of Liang Hui itself shows that how much progress China has made so far. But of course, we have a difficult time ahead. We have a lot of challenges ahead. But it's time for us to sit down and talk about all kinds of issues, our experience in fighting the COVID-19, and also lessons and what can be done in the future.
Professor Jia, if I could, China is facing a series of daunting tasks. Of course, the economy, that is a big question for everybody, every country, post-COVID-19, but also at the same time, how geopolitics combined with all of the other elements like to have a dampening effect on China and also its relations with the others. Professor Jia, you've been working on international relations for decades. Your thought?
Yeah, the COVID-19 crisis has changed the world a great deal. First, this is a great pandemic. A lot of people got affected, and actually millions of people got affected, and a lot of people died. Second, the economy of the world is shut down for a while, has been shut down for a while, and a lot of activities cannot continue. As a result, the world economy is getting into some kind of a recession. And also in the process, we see geopolitical challenges. China and the U.S., their relationship is now in a bad shape. We should be working together to fight the virus, but now we are engaged in all kinds of trading accusations. Global cooperation for dealing with global challenges is also being affected. A lot of things are happening. It's unfortunate that the world has not been working together to fight the virus, to fight the pandemic. I hope we'll find a way to come together to do that.
Fred, you and I have been talking throughout the past two sessions over the past 2 years of MTCC, PPCC. You were a special overseas invitee. So obviously this time you cannot participate in person in Beijing because of travel bans. But what do you make of this year's session yourself?
Well, I think that this session, like Professor Zhang said, it is an important event for China, both for passing legislation and as well as gathering the people from all over China on the national level to discuss issues of importance to the day-to-day life of the people. So this was delayed from March, and now it's May. I think it signifies certainly the easing of the virus in China and the taking a handle on it. And I think that this is a time for the delegation to meet. But certainly this time, these two sessions will be different than most other sessions because of the coronavirus, because of all of the issues. But it's going on.
Talking about China-U.S. relations, both of you are very passionate about and been doing great things over the decades. Some say we should not have much expectations at all because of the political year in the U.S. Meanwhile, because of the dampening effect of the COVID-19, at least the first and the second round already going on. Your thoughts about that, and how is that likely to have its impact on foreign policy blueprint and also mapping out its potential here in China, Professor Jia?
Certainly, the relationship has been in a difficult period. In the past few weeks, we had a lot of conferences and meetings on the internet called webinars, in which we talk about China-U.S. relationship. One of the themes that is repeated is people urging that when we manage our relationship, we should not have too much expectation. We should try hard to improve it step by step. But at the same time, we should try to avoid actions to contribute to the downward development of the relationship. So we have to be realistic, pragmatic. At the same time, we should not lose hope.
Mr. Zhang, Professor Jia gave a laundry list of the challenges that China believes it faces in terms of dealing with the United States and even seeking opportunities to work together. Do you have also a laundry list as your observation about working with China?
Well, I think that there are lists of things, but I think any relationship, it has to be mutually willing to work with each other. If one side is not willing to work with the other side, that relationship will not work at all. Donald Trump's administration is unprecedented in the U.S. history in terms of his manner, his tone, the way of talking about things, and how they communicate and how they present things. It's never seen before. However, we right now in the United States is lack of the kind of true leadership to speak out against that. The United States is a country. It's supposed to be, if you see something that's wrong, you can speak out. But whether the Democrats or Republicans, then nobody is willing to speak out against something is clearly is wrong. So for China, I think is that when relationships don't work, you don't have to work on the relationship. You work on yourself. You make sure yourself is stronger and stronger. And that's time again to prove. You will help you to build more relationship, to have more friends, is when you are strong and when you're able to take care and care for others, then you will be in a good position to have more friends. Whether it's United States or not, that I do not think it matters. But you want to have a lot of friends in this world.
At least there are a lot of friends in the United States. That's already a thing to be celebrated about. Having said that, though, China, United States only making up 40% of the global GDP. There are other 60% in the rest of the world. So how much a vision should be established and further nurtured, Professor Jia, even with your decades of researching about China-U.S. relations, that China should understand this, and also when dealing with the United States, bear this in mind. The world is watching.
Well, the world is facing grave challenges in reviving the economy and promote growth. Yeah, we have some difficulties. But I think China is willing to work with the U.S., with other countries to in this process. I think the U.S., even the Trump administration, would like to work together on this. It's in U.S. interest, also in other countries' interests. So I think we should come together to chip in our efforts to make sure that we have an earlier recovery of the economy.
Earlier, we heard the phone call between Chinese Vice Premier Liu He and also the Secretary Mnuchin and also Mr. Lighthizer regarding the continuation of discussion between the two sides. Both sides mentioned, if I read from their statement, which is about cooperation on economic, macroeconomic, and public health policies. So as long as there's an area already being spotted, are there specific actions that can be encouraged? Are there signs of specific actions of cooperation that you have noticed? Mr. Zhang, would you like to go first?
Well, I think the dialogue has been going on for a long time, ever since President Trump get into the office. The China side has been working willingly and hoping to settle, especially on the trade area. It went through 13, 14 rounds of talk, and in it, the U.S. side's demand has just become more and more intolerable. Certainly, the phone call is good, but I do think that there need to be actions. However, in the U.S. side, I do not see on the current White House administration there's any action that they were willing to take really to work on this, especially until the election time. I'm afraid that there will be more rhetoric that will be coming out, and certainly will not take it lightly either.
So, Professor Jia, your thought?
Some people are touting the idea that at this moment it's difficult for the two countries to work together or to cooperate directly. But I think we can do things unilaterally with the other side, doing things parallel to us. Like we can, try to urge countries take the promoting investment and also further liberalization of trade.
Yes.
And try to work with other countries to, macroeconomic policies to stabilize the economy. So the U.S. may not work with China directly, but it's also in its interest, well, as long as it's not objecting to it. If it can chip in, that's better. So in this way, we can help each other indirectly, and we can by helping the world. So there are different ways of working together at this unusual moment.
Exactly. Finally, before we go, I would like to hear from both of you. What do you think are some of the most important issues that needs to be discussed, and what messages would you expect with this year's very special two sessions, the political season in China? Mr. Zhang, you go first.
I think that certainly COVID-19 or disease control, it will be a very, very hot topic. In the healthcare area, the capacity, the relationship, and all of these things, I think it will be looking at very firmly. But also, a lot of the standards being set, such as alleviating extreme poverties and many of other things, they will probably look at it in terms of how much that they have achieved so far. Certainly, before this, they were working very hard on that. So I think that those are the issues. There's a lot of domestic issues in China, and I think those will always continue and not be put on the sideline.
I see. Professor Jia, your thought?
Yeah, I agree. I think, first of all, the COVID-19, we should summarize our experience and lessons. And also, we should try to, we'll talk about how to strengthen our, public health system, especially the system to monitor, potential virus outbreaks. And also to, a lot of time will be spent on how to renormalize the life, how to come back to work, and at the same time preventing the second outbreak of the virus crisis. And of course, the third thing is the economy, how to revive our economy. It has been hit very hard, just like economies in other countries. But how to revive it, especially with the weakening of demand on the part of the rest of the world. How do we achieve economic growth in this kind of circumstances? And all kinds of other things. So this is going to be a very dynamic sessions full of things to talk about.
Absolutely. A lot of crucial issues to be discussed. We are hopeful that there will be some results and solutions coming out of it. For now, I want to thank both of you. We want to stay safe and be well. Jia Qingguo from Peking University, Standing Committee member of the CPPCC, and Fred Teng, President of America-China Public Affairs Institute. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You are watching World Insight, still to come on the program. The world economy in the shadow of coronavirus pandemic. My exclusive interview with the IMF Deputy Managing Director right after the break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight. The devastating COVID-19 crisis continues to rage across the globe, with the prolonged lockdown disrupting social and economic order. The IMF's recent World Economic Outlook report forecasts the global economy is expected to contract sharply by 3% this year, the worst recession almost since the Great Depression in the 1930s. What happens in China offers an outlook for other countries into possible ways to safely reopen without causing new waves of infection. Well, a sense of normalcy is gradually resuming in China. Will this economy begin to shake off the impact of COVID-19? And how can the world struggle to balance public health, economic recovery? Earlier, I sat down with Zhang, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Let's find out what he has to say.
Actually, even before the COVID-19 pandemic break out, IMF, as you know, they found and the staff working at this full scale, providing advice to the member countries, including the capacity building, technical assistance. But more importantly, of course, we are mobilizing our resources, which is amount to $1 trillion, as you know. Make it ready for our member countries. And particularly these days, in terms of the responding to the emergency financing need, we prepared new facilities for our low-income countries. Currently, we are processing about anywhere between 30 to 50 countries. That's our target. Probably will be reached somewhere these days.
Mr. Zhang, if you look at how the pandemic has been developing over the past more than 100 days, one would argue whether $1 trillion is too little for all the developing countries and underdeveloped economies, even though IMF has been trying to do its best.
To fight the COVID-19 pandemic is a joint effort by all of us. This involves the, first of all, of course, the national authorities and the people in all of the countries, and also involve the international communities, which is the like institutions like IMF, and its development partners like the World Bank and the others, and of course the World Health Organizations, so forth. And of course, we have to work with the private sector as well. So we prepared $1 trillion. It's only part of it, and I believe it's a small part of it. What we are trying to achieve is using our resources, leverage all the other financial resources in the market, in the games, rather than we play the single and sole roles, which is not possible.
For example, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and New Development Bank from the BRICS countries, they've been focusing mainly on the infrastructure building of healthcare. So what is IMF, with your $1 trillion, focusing on, and how could the money be spent more efficiently and more with a focus so that will make a bigger impact, Mr. Zhang?
Each of us play different role. And as mandated by our charters, the IMF working to achieve the economic and financial stabilities around the world. We support jobs and trade and economic growth. So that's our mandate. So we have to make sure that the countries around the world, their physical and monetary situation is sustainable when COVID-19 pandemic hit. So some of the countries may be in urgent need to balance their balance of payment needs, to balance their fiscal needs. That's why our $1 trillion can be put into use.
There are more than 100 economies that are trying to apply for support from the IMF. So I'm really wondering how you guys are working these days. Must be extremely hectic and under extreme pressure, and how to make everybody feel they're being supported. That's a really key issue, isn't it?
You are absolutely right. this is also the first time for the IMF as institutions and also for IMF staff working from home. But fortunately, with the support of the new technologies, with the better organizations, in terms of the response to the need by our member countries, we actually respond quite efficiently. We just finished the online spring meetings and altogether with the IMFC meetings, and we lay out our new strategies. We pushed out our new facilities quite a bit, and we responded to our member countries process, like I said, already processed 30 to 50 countries in a rather short period of time. But I think the people, of course, working very hard, but we get the job done.
So, Mr. Zhang, let me ask you more about Asia. Even though you are sitting in the chair of Deputy Managing Director of IMF, but looking at Asia, what does that mean to you when it comes to the economies coming back to normalcy and also the driver of the economic growth after the pandemic, at least after this round of pandemic, Mr. Zhang?
You may say that Asian economies are in advanced stage in this COVID-19 pandemic cycle. China is among the first to reopen its economies, and the recovery of the economy is ongoing. So we can have a relatively confidence that the early recoveries will be seen in Asian economies. But that doesn't mean you don't have a challenge down the road, given what the nature of the Asian economies and particularly the nature of the world economy. Because the world is highly interlinked. The recovery, and you can say this way, it is now the country by country cases is all recover at the same time. So basically we're saying that the Asian or Asian economies, you cannot sort of recover by your own.
How interlinked do you think the Asian economies are? I mean, particularly when we look at it post this round of pandemic, how much the interlinks of these economies will play its role in at least to guarantee the recovery of the economy on this part of the world?
Asia, relative to the rest of the world, is also part of the world economies. And if you count on the total export by entire Asia, that will increase quite a bit during the last 20 years. So in a sense that even we acknowledge there is increasingly linked between the Asian economies, but there are also quite a reliance on the external demand, while the rest of the world still, or most of them, or some of them remains locked down. The external demand market for Asian economies still remains low, and so you can see there is quite a bit of the limit constraint of the Asian economy in terms of the recoveries. So that's what I'm saying. This is a global phenomena, and we need a global solutions and need a joint effort by everybody around the world.
Got it. Mr. Zhang, there is probably even more geopolitics after this round of pandemic. And meanwhile, this round of pandemic is giving dampening effect to the global economy. So are you really optimistic about what's likely to happen, after everybody coming back to their quote-unquote normal life or partial normalcy?
We at the fund working on multilateral cooperations. Of course, we are the strong believers that open trade, including the global supply chains as such, have brought a tremendous benefit for the entire world, which in terms of the raising living standard or poverty reductions, you name it. So we would very much want it, or hope the member countries take measures to protect the open trade, protect the trade can be executed on the more open, transparent basis, of course, the also rule-based. So these are sort of effort we're still pushing for it. And we thought at this moment it's particularly important to safeguard the global supply chains from disorderly disruptions, particularly in the areas of the medical supplies and the scientific research in terms of the developing the vaccines and the drugs. So these are the effort we're committed and will continues to push for it.
What do you make of the next phase of the Chinese economy, which of course was quote-unquote first in the fire, but possibly also first coming out of fire?
I think the economy is already on the process of reopenings during the last couple of weeks.
Yes.
Since the second half of March, gradually. In order to make further, recoveries, then you have to find a way to use the domestic demand and how to make sure the supply chains within the domestic economy can be, smoothly geared to support domestic demand, both on, the consumption and investment front. The policymakers in China will have a strong stance how to handle these, the important task. And you have seen there's a wide range of the policies has been put into place, ranging from the fiscal, taxes, and also from the central banks. So what we are seeing right now is the liquidities in the market and financial institutions is adequate, and the support is well targeted to the most vulnerables, including the SMEs. So the things have a very good start, and of course we hope down the road the policies can be more and should remain, very vigilant to respond to the changing path of the development, because as we see, the pandemic is still evolving, particularly in other countries. So the things can be very, the uncertainty could be very high. Then the policy response should be ready to respond to different situations.
And you're watching World Insight, still to come on the program. We speak to British scholar Martin Jacques. He discusses the role of governance in halting the pandemic. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases has surged past 4 million globally. The consequent lockdown and social distancing measures have also had obvious economic impacts. Now, many countries are considering partial reopening despite the pandemic not fully under control. Lately, we have talked to Martin Jacques, a senior fellow at the Department of Politics and International Studies of Cambridge University. He also is the author of the book, When China Rules the World. He gave his opinions on the performance of governments around the world in coping with the challenge of COVID-19. And of course, that is still continue a competition among all. We have noticed that you've been observing very closely since the very beginning of the pandemic. I mean, COVID-19 being pronounced by the WHO as a pandemic. The governance style, quote unquote, of the East and the West. Tell me more about your observation results.
Well, I think there have been very marked differences, actually. I mean, if you take East Asia, by which I mean China, Vietnam, South Korea, Singapore, and so on, they've all handled the virus pretty successfully, relatively speaking. I mean, it's a completely new phenomenon. China always is confronted with an unknown. It couldn't look elsewhere. It had to understand it itself and so on. And I think basically they've acted very well in these countries. It's not just a political question, it's a cultural question as well. That's to do with this strong relationship in Confucian-style societies between the state and the individual. You know, the state and the individuals expect governments in these countries to give a lead. They expect governments to take the initiative, and they will respond, and people will respond in a very orderly and a solidaristic way. Now, in Europe and the United States, I think it's much less like that. It varies across the different countries. They're not all the same, but the tendency there has, I mean, this kind of relationship between state and individual is much more distant, and therefore it's not just that individuals don't react in the same way, it's that the state is disinclined to intervene in this way. So, you know, if I look at my own country, really the idea of the lockdown was, you know, very, very slowly adopted by the government. It was reluctant. It moved really relative to the urgency of the time in a snail-like way, a snail's pace, to react to the situation. So, of course, the extreme on the Western side is the United States, where the attitude towards government in the United States is, in the popular view, is to keep it at arm's length, to keep it at bay. You know, the state is a problem. The state is even an adversary, an enemy. So therefore, to get effective action is much more difficult, and that is complicated by two other factors, and that in the United States. One is the federal system, so there's the states on the one hand and the national government on the other, and the other problem is the deep polarization now in American politics, which really, in some degree or another, paralyzes or greatly undermines the capacity to do things.
Yeah. So are we going to be, in a way, delayed as a result of the action from the U.S.? What does it depend on?
The only way we're going to be able to deal with this successfully is by global cooperation, not one nation on its own, but nations together, because we're not out of the woods yet in relationship to this. It could outbreaks could go on, further outbreaks, second, third. You know, we don't know how the virus might mutate over time. So it's absolutely vital that we have collaboration.
As clear as that, these are the priorities. These should be the most important tasks. How confident are you the next step?
Well, I'm not so confident. I mean, I think we just have to be relatively pragmatic while also thinking strategically about the future. But pragmatically speaking, you know, countries are wrestling with the spread. So, I mean, it looks possibly as if Europe is just beginning to turn the corner, but let's get too optimistic about that. I mean, the worst cases have been Italy and Spain, and they seem to maybe peaked. The UK situation is very serious, and of course the American situation, which is the worst in terms of the number of deaths, but you know, Trump's always pulling in another direction, speaking to a different audience, the audience he thinks is going to elect him at the next in the presidential election in November. So I think that and the other thing that must be added here, and I think this could be absolutely critical next question, which is what is going to happen to the developing countries? What's going to happen in East Asia, for example, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in sub-Saharan Africa? These countries have got very weak health facilities, very low proportion of doctors in the population. So that could be a big problem, because then then you can have easily a kickback effect from the developing countries back into the relatively rich countries. So we don't know the end of it. This story is not finished.
How do you see the responsibilities governments has played so far during this stage of COVID-19? I'm not saying the next stage, but this stage so far. Are they disappointing? Should we be optimistic? What can we expect? Can we expect them to change for the better? Your assessment.
Well, I think the word you use, disappointing, is the most accurate one. China took drastic action and was, I think, brilliant in that phase from around about the 23rd of January, the lockdown in Wuhan and so on. The governing classes in the West didn't think this could reach them, that it could affect them. They thought it was a Chinese problem. And they therefore totally misunderstood the significance of coronavirus and thought that it was confined to a Chinese problem. They learned nothing. They had 2 months to prepare. They didn't prepare. The whole response to the pandemic has been colored by the political differences or attitudes towards China in the West, which have seriously weakened the Western response. They didn't learn because they thought they would never be affected. And this was hubris. This was arrogance, on the Western part. And we in the West countries are paying a big price for this. Now, what we need in this situation is, global cooperation. This is, it seems to me, of what the relationship it should be between countries and between medias and between national governments.
And that will do it for this edition of World Insight. To find out more, always you can find us, World Insight, in your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.